Oh my gosh. Seth Andrews. How you doing, brother?
I am well. I'm doing really well. I mean, considering the fact that every day is an exercise and existential dread as I log onto the world and wonder what happened to democracy and decency. But other than that, things are just peachy.
It's almost comical, isn't it? I
Yeah.
watched some Jon Stewart and it's like you can't make this shit up.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
unreal.
I must have been so monumentally naive a few years ago because I really felt like with the rise of the religious nuns, not atheist, I mean, that number's
Sure.
not really going up all that much, but just people who aren't all that religious. And I thought the increasing secularization of the country and all of this is kind of a good thing. And I had really no, I mean, I thought I had a concept of the billionaire power players implementing what has been a 50-year plan to turn us into Gilead. I thought maybe we had kept them at bay, and I was totally wrong. And I think what hurts me the most, Timmy, is I mean, the ignorance is tough, but it's the cruelty, the celebration of cruelty.
Yeah.
The more people are harmed, the more suffering there is, the more, if I forgot who the psychologist was who says dehumanization is a tool that we use that allows us to oppress other people.
Yeah.
And so if you strip immigrants or LGBT people or any minority or trans people, whatever, of their humanity, then you can ostensibly justify treating them any way you want. And I think that's what's happened. We have dehumanized entire demographics, and then people are high-fiving themselves. Yay, aren't we awesome? And man, that just kills a part of my heart, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. It just seems to lack empathy and kindness and love. Often what at least as the Christian that I was raised up in, we were supposed to be kind and caring and loving and like
Yeah.
Jesus. And it's so not like that at all.
Now,
Even
the
in the
best
Christian
teachings of
church.
Christ, right? The best teachings of Jesus, the best teachings of the Bible. If we were just to go through and find, love thy neighbor and blessed are the meek and take care of the poor and feed the hungry and don't be proud and don't take vengeance and all of these
Yeah.
types of things. And this apparently seems to have gone by the wayside as an entire culture of Bible thumping Christians have decided they want the angry, jealous God, the God that punishes their enemies, that will
Right.
damn the wicked. They apparently are getting off on that particular God, which is the same God. But I mean, a lot of folks like to sort of cherry pick that guy out
Right.
of their faith. And I get that. I understand. I mean, I think probably you did it when you were
Oh, I did it.
a minister, right? The more that stuff's more it becomes uncomfortable and clashes against your moral compass, the more you just kind of, I think we'll preach about the happy clappy Jesus over here, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it was all I remember people that would come into the church and would ask me questions and in my mind I'm thinking, yeah, don't ask me that. I
yeah,
don't I
don't ask
don't
me that
I can't
question.
make sense of that. It doesn't seem right to me either, but
Yeah,
I can't admit that.
yeah,
And you and I've known each other a long time, it's a long story, we won't get into it, but you and I met at a family reunion. And you were a Christian radio DJ at the time, and I think I was either in Bible college or I was youth pastoring, um, one of the two.
you were, I
And
think, already at the beginning of your ministry. I don't know.
okay,
It's been 3+ decades. I don't
30
even know
years.
that guy. I just look back and I think I just want to go back in time and have a chat with the
Yeah,
younger Seth. But then the question is, would I have listened? And I don't know if I was there. I
yeah.
think I would have been a closed system at that time. I don't
And
know.
what do you think causes that? Seth, that's an interesting point because I've had people ask me that. What if you could go back to the younger Timmy? And I said the same thing you did. I said, I don't think that Timmy would have even given that person the time of day because they weren't Christian.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember hearing about God is not great, which was blasphemy. Christopher
Yeah.
Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, I found to be, not now, but then I found to be just despicable. He was just a terrible human. An atheist to me was And I'm just a newer atheist, as you know. It's been a long, slow journey for me, and I've finally come out of the closet, and I'm like, I'm an atheist. I was an atheist probably a year or so before I really admitted it, because it just has that connotation, at least as a Christian. In our environment, in the Bible Belt, atheist is godless. Atheist is Satan. Atheist is, it's just seems to be kind of related to be something bad. And I'm sure, it's changing now. And I'm very open about it now. And it doesn't seem to cause me too much trouble. Um,
Well,
I
I
think.
wrote about this in my autobiography, Deconverted, where if you say someone is lost, the subtext of that is that they can be found, right?
Right.
But the word atheist is much more sinister. In fact, when you hear Christians say it, sometimes it just kind of sneers out of their mouth. Atheist, that you're an enemy of God. Maybe
Yeah.
you're just hopeless. And Natalie told me, as she met me kind of during my deconstruction, but she told me that a few years before that, when she considered herself much more religious, she wouldn't have associated with me if she had known that I was an atheist, as she would have kept her distance. And it's interesting that our relationship and the fact that we are life partners and that, I'm her person and she's mine, and that she has been introduced to the world of the non-religious, the atheists. She said it's totally transformed how she sees her fellow human beings. She's like, there were amazing, wonderful atheists, and there were horrible, shitty Christians. Like, I've learned to approach people as people, and let's start there at the human level. Um, but it's like when I was like you. I didn't admit to myself, but I kind of already down here knew that I didn't believe, right?
Yeah.
But it took me a while to say the word. And I was on the phone with my mother, evangelical, hardcore Bible literalist.
Yeah.
And this was her worst nightmare, right? That a son would leave the faith. It was
Absolutely.
her failure, it was my failure. And I remember we were on the phone. And I said, Mom, I'm an atheist. And she was crying. And she said, No, 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 you're not an atheist. You're not an atheist. Mom, I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist. No, you're not an atheist. You just have doubts. You just have questions. We've all gone through these valleys. It's going to be okay. You may not believe, but you're not an atheist. And you could see her resist that word because it
Yeah.
was heartbreaking to her. And I think there is still a stigma out there. It's gotten better, but yeah,
Yeah.
there's still a stigma for sure.
Yeah. Well, my parents feel the very same way, and it's almost like I'm dropping an F bomb around my parents, which clearly I mean the word fart, because I was raised fart was bad, so you had to say pert. And then in 1980, Procter and Gamble came out with Pert shampoo. That was quite a joke in our family. But anyway,
Wow.
yeah, my mother, same thing, Seth. I have said, I'm an atheist or whatever, and she'll say, "Well, you're not an atheist. You're not an atheist," and I'm like, Mom,
Yeah.
don't tell me what I am or what I'm not. They still are holding out for that verse that, pray for, train up a child in the way that they should go. And when they're old, they will not, they'll return, or whatever the scripture is. I've been out of it so long, I'm starting to forget those things. But the truth is, I'm sure much like you, uh, that's very unlikely. If almost, I would say, because I'm sure you get asked this all the time. What could make you go back, or what could turn you?
Yeah.
And it's just, it's definitely not, well, Matthew chapter 14 says this, like none of that's going to do anything. It would have to be something so like outstandingly amazing that it wouldn't just be me seeing it. Like it would have to be some kind of a global, clear evidence that it's real for me to even really be curious to go, oh, okay, well,
Yeah, it's hard when we are asking others to always question and don't, but I forgot who said it, but an open mind is meant to close on things, not weld shut, but like we know the earth is a sphere.
right.
The overwhelming preponderance of evidence, we know the earth is a sphere. Now, if one day we learn that we are in a giant simulation, or the earth is in a snow globe, that or just some wacky thing, we
Right.
have to be prepared to peel it back open. But it's okay for us to say no. I mean, as far as the evidence shows us, this is settled. So I think it would be hard for me to go back and accept an anonymously written book that talks about, an enchanted garden with a dirt man and a rib woman and a talking snake and 1,000-year-old people and a guy who lived in a submerged prison fish for 3 days and dragons. And, that's going to be a tall order. Now, the larger God question, is there a higher power? Whatever. If you got something, come, let's talk about it. For me, though, that even becomes an interesting question, because if a higher power God figure does exist, and you and I here in the age of information are still having to ask the question of whether or not it exists, he exists, whatever, that tells me that that deity doesn't really care enough to prove himself anyway, right? I
Right.
mean, that God might as well is a deadbeat dad. And
Right.
when somebody comes to me and they're like, well, what would it take? What would it take, man? I used to say it would take evidence, and that's probably a good answer. But Matt Dillahunty came up with a better one that I actually really like. He said, if God exists and God is all knowing and all powerful, that God already knows exactly what it would take to convince me. So I don't even have to know
Oh,
what it
that's
would take, because God would know, and then God could settle it immediately right here, front and center. And I think that's a pretty good answer.
yeah. Yeah, I love that. Well, before I get into what I was wanting to ask you about and talk with you about, by the way, thank you so much for coming on
Oh,
the
yeah.
Timmy Gibson show, and thank you for platforming me. You helped me in the kind of the beginning of my journey, and it really helped to launch my
It
channel.
was
And
awesome. You came and sat in my living room, and I rolled cameras, and then you and I came up to the studio and talked for like another hour. It's just effortless, man. It is
well,
just effortless.
yeah, well, it's such a joy. It's been a real help to me, and I really, really appreciate it.
Okay.
So yeah, dude, Oklahoma. What? There is some crazy ass stuff going on in Oklahoma. One about the Bibles, the Trump Bible. So there's that. Then
Yep.
there's the Robert Morris stuff. Whoa. Every time I turn around, and you and I are old enough to remember, I remember the Jimmy and Tammy Faye Baker scandal. I remember Jimmy Swaggart scandal. I met Jimmy Swaggart like right about that time. Uh, all that stuff, right? And the Jerry Lee, like all the different, or Larry Lee, all the different scandals that have gone on through the years. And then the Hillsong, Carl Lentz, and just continue to go. And then Robert Morris, who I met, and I'll never forget when I met him down at Gateway Church. I was down there for a pastor's conference, and I got a chance to meet him face to face. And I walked away from that, and I was a bona fide tongue talking, Holy Ghost rolling pastor at that time. And I remember I walked away, and I had one of my associates from my church with me, and I literally walked away, and I said, that guy's an asshole. I said, I bet you that the scandal's going to come out about this dude. I kid you not. My friend even remembered. He goes, you remember what you said? I said, yeah, dude, I just felt like there's going to be a scandal. And here we are,
How is it that I'm in Oklahoma and I haven't heard this story?
Oh
I
my,
don't know. I
Robert
don't know.
Morris, Gateway Church?
I have not heard this
Oh,
about this scandal. Please fill
well,
me in.
so he has been an evangelist for many, many years, and he was in Oklahoma staying at a guest home. That's how we would try. I used to be an evangelist. I would come to a city and stay with the pastor and his family, or a host home. So one of the close friends of the pastor, I would stay in their home. So Robert Morris, married with a child, is preaching charismatic, health and wealth gospel throughout Oklahoma, stays at this guest home, host home. And in that home is a 12-year-old girl. And he's in his late 20s, early 30s, I believe, at the time. And he gets
Wow.
inappropriate with her for 4 years. Every time he comes to town,
Hmm.
essay, yeah. And it's a long. I mean, there's a longer,
Oh, I'll
obviously a
bet a
longer.
bunch of his sermons were about sexual sin too. Normally, if you see a preacher and all they do is talk about sins of the flesh and stuff, you better check that closet for
Yep,
skeletons, man.
yep.
You know?
Yeah, there's a sermon that he did. Now he started a church, Gateway Church, down in Dallas, Texas area, I think. 25,000 people. And pulled one of his sermons, and he was talking about inappropriate relationships just in general, like preaching. And the name, the fake, the name he just threw out was the name of this 12-year-old.
Wow. Wow.
Anyway, long story short, there's no because he now lives in Texas, doesn't live in Oklahoma. This woman was able to file suit, and he's been indicted on like 9 counts of very bad things with a
Yeah.
child.
Yeah.
Yeah, just
Jeez.
crazy. But you know what he said? It was funny when he came out. He said he was not guilty and that she tempted him.
Oh, yeah.
He was the
Well, that's
temptress.
typical, isn't it?
I'm just
We
like,
You
what?
mentioned Swaggart. I mean, how many prostitutes did Jimmy Swaggart sleep with? And then he'd go back in front of his people with tears streaming down his face. I've sinned against God and man, and then he continued to preach. How many of these folks, they fall from grace and they hang out in the shadows for 6 months, and then they come forward with their mea culpas and they're back, and often they're making millions of dollars. And I think, Timmy, you and I, if we weren't people with a moral compass, we could go back to the church and we could say, you know what, I found Jesus again, and I've
Yeah.
seen what happens behind the scenes with those evil, wicked people, the heathens, the non-believers, the atheists, and I want to go. And hell, they'd spin us all around the freaking country at the
Oh,
end of an offering plate, and we clean up.
yeah.
So
Unfortunately, that's I feel that's what's kind of your take on the Russell Brand, the Jordan Petersons, the Joe Rogans. All the Christians want to just grab on like they're talking more about God now. They're loving Jesus, which they're not. They're not. It seems like a joke to me, or at least just insincere for the most part. What's your take on some of that?
Well, I mean, they're all different animals. Jordan Peterson, when he started to talk about the metaphysical substrate and weird, wacky shit like that, I was just like, what? And the people who think he is a great mind, I just, and the Ben Shapiros who just spew venom, and yet they are wildly successful and they're embraced by the hard right evangelical types. Joe Rogan, it hurts the heart. We've done whole shows on Joe,
Yeah.
and I think this guy is just as thick as a post, right? And he's just, my friend Erica calls it the school of cool, or
Yeah.
the rule of cool. Whenever somebody comes on, whatever conspiracy theory that he happens to like, he latches onto. He used to be a guy who was a moon landing denier, and then he finally figured that one out. But he's having all of these pseudoscientists on and all of these really toxic people. And under the auspices of, we just want to have conversations, which is an extremely childish way of looking at it. He is now platforming, legitimizing. And I'll tell you, no one will ever tell me who I could have on my show. If I decided to have a Joe Rogan or a Jordan Peterson or a Ben Shapiro, even toxic people, I have the right to do that. And
Sure.
I think others do as well. But I think where there's light, there must also be heat. And Joe Rogan simply does not have, I don't think he has the toolkit, and I don't think he has the inclination to really push back on any of the horrible stuff. If you want to expose or bring somebody on to say terrible and destructive and anti-science and anti-humanity things, then you better be ready to bring the heat. And
Yeah.
instead, he just sits there and he's like, wow. He always does that sound.
Yeah.
Wow. When he and Mel Gibson were talking about the Shroud of Turin,
Oh God, which has totally been debunked.
right? I mean, Mel Gibson's talking about how, well, the way the imprint was made was a white hot flash of light that could not have been replicated, and it's been perfectly dated back to the time of Christ. And I'm screaming at the computer monitor going, no, 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 that's false. That's false. Another Mel Gibson ism that Joe Rogan totally let slide was about the validity of the New Testament and the disciples. They must have existed because nobody dies for a lie. I'm sorry.
Just modern day
sorry.
provably false.
I'm sorry. No, so the 9/11 terrorist who died for Allah, that makes the Quran true and Islam real. the Heaven's Gate cult who drank the poison in their purple tennis shoes to
Yeah.
go and join the spaceship behind the comet. They died. Does that mean that the Heaven's Gate philosophy, just so stupid? And Joe just sits there and goes, "Wow."
Wow.
And this is the culture that we live in. I worry that we are, at least here in the States, we're a nation of bright, shiny things,
Yeah.
of constant distraction. We are getting our information about life, the universe, and everything from these little 8-second TikTok clips. Whoever's polished, whoever speaks to our biases, whoever is there at a vulnerable time, who says just the right thing and is selling just the right product, we just happily lean into it. And Carl Sagan used to talk about the death of critical thinking and the consequences. And I think we're seeing those consequences today.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a great podcast that just came out called, I think it's called the No Rogan.
Yeah. Yeah. I interviewed those guys. Yeah.
Oh, did you? Oh, you know what? That's how I found out about them.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
for doing that because I
Well,
really enjoy their show. Now, I don't watch Joe Rogan anymore, and I did an episode on my show called I had to stop watching Joe Rogan. He was making me a conspiracy theorist because he really was. I mean,
yeah.
I really found myself conspiratorial ish. I mean, I don't buy into it, but it just made me more apt to be that way and to do the same thing that Joe was doing. You get someone on there, and if, like you said, if they're eloquent and all that, and they're saying things with confidence, like it's true, you're like, whoa,
Yeah. Yeah.
vaccines do cause autism, though there's no proof of this.
I mean,
Um,
the fact that Joe has the #2 podcast in the world, to me, I just think is kind of a commentary on where we are as a
absolutely,
culture. Now, I've nothing personal against Joe. I don't want to see any harm come to Joe,
sure,
but I do want to occasionally grab him by the shoulders and shake him and
yeah,
say, "Quit it." Just
yeah,
stop this.
yeah. I wish he would
Uh,
just have some balance where he would have on. Of course, he did have on what's his face recently, who did kind of go to task with that.
I think it's Douglas Murray
Yeah,
who's
Douglas Murray.
been he's kind of problematic, but there was some legit pushback. If I don't know if I'm qualified because he would if we were to get into the science, but I can think of a few people that I would nominate where if they were invited, I would be like, yeah, 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 go.
Yeah,
Take those 3 hours and just have him demonstrate, right?
yeah,
Show me. And okay, well, here's the science that speaks to this, 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 and this. And he would just sit there, probably blown away, and go, "Wow." Now,
yeah,
I don't know if he'd ever change his mind.
sure,
Maybe he
sure.
did change his mind on the moon,
Yeah,
but this is kind of where we are. And you and I are surrounded, and maybe this is a priming by religion in some ways for some people. People believe, but they do not know.
right.
I just know in my heart, or it feels intuitive,
Feels right.
right? And so if you and I used to think, I just released a speech that I gave about why facts aren't changing minds. You and I walk into a room, right? You and I came out of the faith. Forgive, I'm just babbling here,
Yeah,
brother.
yeah,
Sorry
no, it's
about that.
good.
So you and I walk into a room full of believers that we've known for decades. And we've come out of the faith and we think, man, they're going to be fascinated to find out what I've discovered. And as soon as they learned why all of this stuff is wrong and why, the Christianity is debunked mythology, they're going to want to know that because we're all pursuers of truth. And then they'll slough off their chains and we will all lock arms and frolic into Reasonville together. And there will be light and music and confetti. It'll be awesome. And it never happened because, in fact, they often double down because Christianity for them isn't about the facts. It's about an identity. It's who
Yeah,
they are. It's their community. It's all they've known. It's comfort. It fills blanks. It helps alleviate the fear of death. There's all these really emotional and cultural reasons. Atheists often know the Bible better than the people who say they believe it,
yeah,
but we can't get people to walk away when we walk in with our data points. And it's because in so many cases, it's not really what they think. It's kind of who they are.
yeah,
And whenever you and I bring in debunking material, they feel kind of ideologically unsafe. And then the fight, flight, or freeze reaction kicks in. The amygdala is the fear center of our brain. And it's been demonstrated that people respond to an ideological threat the same way they do to a physical threat.
Mhm.
If somebody breaks into my house, the amygdala fires up, right? Fight, flight, freeze. If somebody comes in and endangers or threatens my core beliefs, fight, flight, or freeze, the same part of the brain activates. It's some interesting psychology at play
Yeah.
there, I think. So,
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think it feels like if it feels right, then it must be right. And that comes from religion because it's, faith is a virtue in the religious circles, and you don't want to be thrown into the same room with doubting Thomas, right?
yeah.
You want to be included. That's not a compliment. And I think for me, I think most people are somewhat critical thinking in other areas of life, but when you're in the Christian or the mystical or kind of a world, or even just hearing things, it feels like that's true, which doesn't mean it's
Yeah.
true at all. But you're right. Facts. I've actually had a conversation with someone where I had some a video that debunked what they believed. They didn't want to see it.
Yeah.
And I was like, really? Like, because I've watched some of your videos and I would be willing to watch something if there was something I said that you absolutely knew was wrong and you had a video to show me, I would watch it because, like you said, I want to know the truth, which is why I'm an atheist now. It's why I left the faith. The truth did set me free, and I wanted to know, and I still want to know. I was an anti-vaxxer up until not too long ago.
Mhm.
And I thought, you know what? I'm an anti-vaxxer for reasons I'm not really sure why. Um, be, I didn't know. So I thought, I'm going to do some more research and look into this. And then the more I looked into it, I didn't even have to go that deep. Oh,
Yeah.
that's been debunked. Like,
Yeah.
that's absolutely not true.
You're right that the Bible is pretty hard on the doubter, right? The one who doubts is like a wave of the sea,
Mhm.
blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord.
Yeah.
So we have a culture where if you doubt, then that might express weakness or maybe an attack of the devil. Maybe you're an agent of Satan, kind of thing. And it's a great defense mechanism for the faith because doubters are then seen as the enemies of God.
Right.
And I think you and I use doubt all the time in the rest of our lives. And it's a wonderful protective mechanism. If you go out on a first date and there's something there, no matter what this person says, you doubt that they're a safe person. Well, that doubt may keep you from being hurt. If somebody shows up at your door and they're selling a product, all they need is your credit card number. Well, your doubt may keep you from getting scammed. We
Yeah.
investigate all the time. We investigate the foods we eat. We investigate what college we send our kids to. We investigate, we doubt, we investigate, we doubt. And we even doubt other religions. Somebody comes and they're like, well,
Right.
Islam or Hinduism or whatever. This is what John Loftus calls the outsider test for faith, where we
Yeah.
demand evidence. You're going to have to show me why that's true. Otherwise, I think it's a bunch of crap. And
Yeah.
then we flip and say, well, I'm going to accept my own faith on faith. And it's a total double standard. But doubt, once I begin to realize that doubt is actually a gift, it's a wonderful way to investigate the world. And I think when I speak to believers, I do two things. Well, among the things I do, one is I say, doubt is actually often really an important thing for self-protection and the protection of those and the things we love. And two, I like to tell believers that, I may have a higher opinion of you than you have of yourself. The Bible says there's no one worthy. Bible says you deserve damnation. You had to be saved. Jesus had to shed his blood. Otherwise, you would be damned forever because you were born with this sin nature. You know what? I don't think you were born broken. I don't think you're unworthy. I don't think you're wicked. I think you have tremendous value and you're beautiful and your life has meaning on your own terms. And I actually give you more credit than your faith gives yourself. That knocks people back on their heels sometimes,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I remember thinking that without Jesus, I would be nothing.
yeah.
And which is just a terrible belief system. And one of the most surprising things for me when I walked away from faith Seth, there's a lot of great people out there
Yeah.
who aren't Christian, who don't believe, and that was shocking to me. It was often like being in the Truman Show. I was inside this bubble, and once I got outside of it, I thought I was told there were just monsters and evil and demons running everywhere, and that is just not true at all. There's a lot of
Did
great
you
people.
find that there was a release when you didn't have to go around judging people who weren't like you? Did it just
Oh,
like
yeah,
'cause I was like, Wait a minute," I don't have to be judgy anymore." It's
yeah.
awesome. So,
Yeah, it really is. I was a very judgmental person as a Christian. I mean, I think we're all a little judgy or can be, but I
yeah.
was hyper judgmental as a Christian. Which speaking, so the thing that I'm curious of, I've seen hours and hours of your lectures and speeches and different things that you've done over the years. One of the things that I just wanted to find out from you to take you back, because my channel deals a lot with that. I really seem to resonate with people who are early on with their starting to have doubts and questions, and they're starting to see some holes in their religious beliefs, and they're kind of beginning that deconstruction process. Go back. What you're a radio DJ on a Christian in a Christian world. What was the first couple things that made you go, this might just be bullshit?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to say there were a few major things and about 1,000 tiny ones. But it was in the mid 90s that my best friend, who I'd known since my sophomore year in high school, he wrote me a letter. He'd moved to Dallas and he wrote me a letter and he revealed to me that he had been hiding a secret. And the secret was that he was gay. Now, I didn't have I didn't know. I mean, he'd totally hidden it. He'd been married once to a woman and I just, I was still in that sort of Old Testament mindset where God judged gay people,
Right.
and this was still when AIDS was kind of a thing, and I was like, "Oh God, he's gonna get AIDS," I was so
Right, right,
naive,
right.
and I freaked out, and I sent him a kind of a I don't know, a superior sounding letter about my concerns, and then we didn't speak for a year, radio silence. And after a year, I realized how much I missed him and how he was still a lovely person. And so I reached back out. We began to build that bridge. And I think it was right then I started to scratch out those anti LGBT verses in the Bible. I was like, yeah, God wouldn't judge Corey. We had the death of a Christian artist in 1997. His name is Rich Mullins,
Mm,
and he was in a horrible car wreck. His body was just mangled by a semi truck on the road. I mean, just a horrible story.
yeah.
And yet, it was my job to go on the air and deliver the news and then place it in the context of everything happens for a reason, God's will be done. And so, he's in a better place and he's now we will all be reunited at the pearly gates and God knows what he's doing. And then the whole time I really felt like this doesn't wash. 9/11 was a big deal. Everybody was invoking God all over the place and I just saw human beings and then I went dormant in the faith, meaning that I kind of wore Christianity like a lapel pin, so I didn't have to really like no one would know I was doubting. And
Yeah.
I could walk in and be the Christian, but I wasn't doing anything religious. And I find I don't know if it's midlife or, when you stop worrying too much about what other people think, you just don't care as much. Got to that point and I stumbled upon a debate video with Christopher Hitchens. And I was just, I just hit click. I was doing some other work and he's debating a rabbi. And I'm not Jewish, but I was thinking, well, the good rabbi can probably defend the Bible. This will be interesting. And after 90 minutes, I felt like someone had just thrown me out of a car. I was like, the guy I'm supposed to disagree with made the most sense. What do I
Right.
do with that? Right. And then that propelled me. And before you knew it, I was clicking on other videos and watching other debates. And then they were mentioning authors of books. So I bought the books and people told me I was obsessed. Like, what's the matter with you? This is all you're talking about. It's all you're doing. It's all you're thinking about. And they're right. I was obsessed.
Now, were you still on the radio at that time?
No, I left radio. Well, I was dormant in the faith when I left radio in 2004. And then I got a job shooting videos for churches. I shot videos, fundraising and promotional and ministry videos for hundreds of churches. But the whole time
Fascinating.
under the skin, I'm like, you
So
know,
you're kind of doubting at this time and clicking on these videos, and yet your job is filming all these videos
oh
for
God.
churches. And
And
okay,
then what do I do, right? If it's not true, if I lose my job, what else can I do? What else do I know? Where would I go? Will I lose my house? What will my families and friends say? What are the consequences? Who am I?
yeah,
Man, I had a lot of sleepless nights. There were some people who were like, "Ah, God, you figured out that Santa Claus doesn't exist. So, welcome to the party, pal." And they're totally dismissive about religious trauma. I'm
yeah,
telling you, it's real.
yeah.
I was staring at the ceiling. My gut was in a knot. I didn't even know who or where I was. And that went on for a long, long time.
And so
And
this
even
is all
after I
pre
said the
before
word
you went
atheist,
public,
it took
right?
me a few years to settle
This,
in. So.
so this was totally before you had gone public with it. This is just all the stuff going on in Seth's
Oh,
background.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I should have waited. And when people come out of the faith, often they're pretty hot.
Yeah.
Like they're mad at themselves for taking so long. They're mad at other people because no one seems to be listening. They're pissed off at religion for the damage that it did to them. The angry atheist thing is a thing.
It is.
That was pretty hot. And so, I come out of the faith in 2008. Well, I started my website and the YouTube channel in 2009,
Hmm.
but nobody could know it was me. So I didn't show my face for a couple of years. I
Well, yeah.
produced content on the Thinking Atheist channel, and only my first name, and no one ever saw my face. I was totally anonymous.
Did you try to disguise the voice or no? Because your voice is
No, I
pretty,
didn't do that
okay.
because I figure, well, what are the chances?
Right.
But I didn't nobody knew me. I could have walked by anybody anywhere and they probably would have had zero idea because I thought, well, if my employer finds out, then I'm on the street. They're an evangelical. They'll find a reason to get rid of me. Most of our clients are churches. What else am I going to do? How am I going to get out of this? So it wasn't until 2011 that I finally just said, fuck it. Let's just do it, So
Well, that's I say this only because I think the listeners would appreciate this. So in my journey, as I walked away from the Christian faith, for me it was a very gradual. I was a progressive Christian, then I was a very open-minded, gay loving Christian, and I just kept moving further and further away from evangelical fundamental conservative Christianity, and then even became I'm spiritual, not religious. Well, as I'm really beginning to ask these questions, I stumbled on an audio, the Thinking Atheist. And I mean, the second I heard your motherfucking voice, I was like, that is Seth. And I text you, I was like, yo, bro. I could probably pull the text up. I was like, yo, Seth, I think I am hearing you. I said, dude, are you atheist? Like, tell me more. And the rest is history.
Now, wait a minute. When you heard that, though, were you kind of judgy? Like, were you scared for me? Were you still?
I was shocked. I was shocked because at this point I would have said I was spiritual, not religious. So I was kind of jiving with it. I was like, man, I am really sharing in a lot of what he's saying. Like I'm, and whatever video it was that I came across, you were really, like maybe it was the Satanic Panic or I don't know what it was, but it was stuff that I just really resonated with. And I was 100% just going, fuck yeah. But I was still, there's a higher power, all that. So it wasn't, if you'd have caught me 2 years before that, I would have called you and said, man, I'm praying for you. I'd have said, man, I'll come down. Let's talk, But yeah, no, I was kind of aligning with some of the things that you were saying. And so I was just, I was blown away. Honestly, I was just like, oh my gosh, like Seth is atheist.
Dude, you know what's wacky is I get messages, secret messages from people who are still in the Christian music radio industry. And they're like, dude, I can't tell anybody. I go on and I work for this, churchy organization, and I play Christian music all the time. That's my career, and I don't really know where else I could go. So this is it. But I'm an atheist, and I've been listening to you on the side. And I just wanted to reach out and say, hey, I've had people in my own family. Now, this is my family is as Jesus-y as they come.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? My father passed away. I mean, we're talking about theologian level believers, and they just sort of imprinted their faith onto the kids, and they had other kids. A lot of people in my family religiously homeschool their children, and they go to church all the time, and it's Jesus, 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 Jesus. I've had people reach out to me, 30 and unders, reach out to me, and they're like, hey, psst, I can't tell anybody in the family because I saw what you went through. But I just want you to know that I don't believe in a God either, and you're not alone. And I really appreciate the stand you've taken. Now, part of me wants to shake them and say, dude, give me some backup here, you know?
Yeah.
But I appreciate the fact that they felt safe enough with me to reach out and say, okay, I'm an atheist, but, and that tells me that there are more of us than a lot of people realize. I think they're just sort of playing chess, not checkers. So.
Yeah, especially when it's their livelihood. I recently talked to someone who is on staff at a mega church, and he told me, he said, yeah, man, he goes, I'm an atheist, but I'm their tech guy, and I just check all the boxes.
I met a guy who was he was a professional musician. And sometimes he did contract work for Christian bands in the studio. They'll bring in studio musicians. And he's like, I've played on Christian albums, but I mean, that's my job. They pay me a contract fee, and I have kind of reconciled it in my brain. It is what it is. And I'm not going to call that guy a sellout. You're doing your job. You're doing what you can. I won't begrudge somebody that.
Yeah. So two things. I want to dig into when you first started coming out and how you were handling those conversations with friends and family. But before that, I got to tell you something so funny. So, my wife's in a band, and her band's called Into the Gray. And I met her, at a gig down in Eureka Springs. Anyway, her guitarist, his name's Skinny Webb. I actually did a video with him on my channel here, and he's a non-believer. And he goes, you want to hear a funny story? He goes, you remember that Christian rock band Stryper? I was like, oh yeah. I said, come on. I said, I met Stryper. And he said, really? He goes, you want to hear a fun story? I said, yeah. He goes, well, back in the day, now, Skinny Webb's my age, amazing guitar player. He goes, yeah, Stryper came to Des Moines, Iowa, where I was living. And he goes, my girlfriend at the time, she was a stripper. He goes, I went over to her house one morning, the night after Stryper was in town. He said, when I showed up at her door, Stryper was there.
Wow.
Yeah, Michael Sweet, all of them, they were there doing cocaine, doing strippers, having a hooting time.
Oh, the Lord works in mysterious ways, doesn't he?
And the night before, they're throwing out the to hell with the devil. But not tomorrow morning when we're with the strippers.
Wow. I'll bet that's more common than people realize too.
Well, I was just going to ask you. I mean, I've heard, so as a buddy of mine, I won't mention his name because he's still a pastor down in Nashville, Tennessee, and Uber Evangelical. And ever since I left the faith, we don't talk much. He doesn't want to talk to me. But anyway, he was a band manager. He managed bands, Christian bands back in the day. And he had always told me that, unfortunately, these bands, they're young people. He had all these weird excuses for them. But he said, yeah, they live kind of like rock star lifestyles. I'm like, really? And he said, oh yeah. He said they party and sleep around, and they just act just like everybody else. And I'm like, really? I was such a naive Christian, because I don't know how you were as a Christian, Seth, I really tried to sincerely live it. Like I really tried to pray every day for an hour, right? Could I not tarry 1 hour? I really read my Bible every day. I really tried to be what I thought was a good Christian. I mean, it was tormenting, because, as a Christian, everything's wrong. Cussing's wrong, smoking's wrong, drinking's wrong, masturbation's wrong, premarital, like everything's wrong. And so, you're just, it's inevitable that you're going to be doing some things that Christianity calls wrong or sin. So I was just I felt guilty all the time. I felt like, a con artist, and though I was a good dude, I was very sincere. But the guilt and the shame that just piled up it's so good to be free.
Yeah.
And I tell people all the time, I'm literally a more moral person today than I was as a Christian. And I think it's because I'm not hiding. There's nothing to hide. I'm very open, very authentic. Because I don't have to hide things that I was hiding as a Christian. I was never a crazy person. But I was a
I mean,
normal
the church
person.
has a great business model, right? They tell you you're sick and then they sell you the cure.
Yeah.
And when I was in the industry, I think it's a lot like any ministry. I think when you look behind the curtain, it's easy to become cynical. And a lot of people like to speak in very general, broad ways about Christian musicians. They couldn't make it in secular music, so they went over here. And they're all a bunch of cons, and they're all a bunch of fakes, and they're all hypocrites. And, that wasn't my experience. I did see some of those people.
Yeah.
You could tell it was a business. You could see them checking their watches. They were, some were just burned out. I think they had seen how much of an industry it had become, how much of a business. There were some people who genuinely wanted to do ministry. And I think they were hamstrung by the dollar figures and the marketing and the airbrushing and the control that the studios had over them. And I think there were other people who were just awful people until they stepped on stage. And then it was all, hey, man, Jesus. And, no one knew the difference. What's that line? Never meet your heroes. And I met a lot of my heroes behind the scenes in the green room. And some were stellar, lovely, sincere, wonderful believers. The others were just tired. You could see they were just fried, disillusioned. They'd been there, done that. They'd seen too much. Maybe they were going through their own journey of disbelief or doubt or skepticism, cynicism. And then I met other people who were just shitty people.
Yeah.
And, maybe they just kind of found their niche and they were really good at acting pious and holy on stage. But in their regular life, I mean, I'm thinking of one concert. So the concert's over and we exited the back of the auditorium. And all the guys, including the lead singer, out there smoking cigarettes and doing their thing. And of course, in the church, that was scandalous, man.
Oh yeah.
You're desecrating the temple of Jesus Christ back there. If people could only see what I'm seeing now, well, all the dominoes would fall. I mean, that's how judgmental we were. But they weren't smoking on stage. They waited till nobody was looking in the back of the building. Yeah, there you go. So
that is wild.
Yeah.
So for you, early on, I think one of the biggest questions that I get on my channel, emailed to me or comments, handling those relationships with the Christian family and the Christian friends. Take me back to when you were starting to be a little bit more vocal about it and coming to terms with it, kind of living, outwardly, as we say, as it came to your beliefs. How did you navigate the relationships with those around you who were still very religious?
Ooh, I was, well, I started with mom and dad. Now we have a very deferential family when it comes to my parents because they both had, theology degrees and they met at a religious university. My mother wrote a Greek New Testament study guide used at the college level. And I mean, there was no religious small talk in my house. They studied shit that was Hebrew and Greek and all of this other stuff,
Yeah.
And so the effect of that was that when mom and dad said something to the children and grandchildren, we were like, oh, well, they know what they're talking about. So we would just accept it wholesale. We'd be like,
Yeah.
oh, well, of course. Well, they would know.
Yeah.
I don't speak Greek and Hebrew. I don't know what that's about. But what that fostered was a culture of blind acceptance, and we didn't do our own thinking. But when I was starting to really go through a lot of these questions that weren't making sense, and I thought, well, I'm going to figure this out. I began asking questions to my mother and father. Well, if anyone would know the answer, they would know the answer.
And you were like genuinely curious.
I was. I
Yeah.
was. Can you explain this? How does this jive with this? Why does this verse contradict this one? Why, what, how? And I immediately, when I began to ask those questions, their alarms went off. Uh-oh, he's starting to doubt. These questions are not the questions of someone firm in their faith. Uh-oh. And then they went into like rescue mode. My house was on fire and they were going to come and they were going to, get me out of there. And but the more answers I got back from the experts, whether it's mom and dad or an apologist or whatever, the pastors wouldn't try to explain it. When I was thinking for myself, the more they tried to make it make sense, the less sense it made.
All right.
I'm what? Can you explain incest in the Bible? I mean, well, incest? Are you kidding me? Well, human DNA was purer back in Old Testament days, and so sex with your sister was. And I'm just like, what? The more they tried to rationalize it, the more they drove me further from the faith, or allowed me to walk further. And then it became a kind of panic where, the prodigal is here, and what are we going to do? And dad adopted more of a tough love thing. I remember writing him a letter. This had been going on, and he was, very disappointed, and he was heartbroken. And some days they'd approach me with, well, here's how history proves the Bible. And the next day it'd be, well, it's a personal relationship. And the next day would be threats of hell. And they just tried every angle that they could looking for a way in. But I wrote this letter to my dad and I said, Dad, I know you're a good man and I know you did your best as a father. And I appreciate every sacrifice you've made. And I'm proud to be your son. And I hope that we could live around this disagreement to be a family, knowing that, I'm in God's hands. If there is a God, God is strong enough to prove himself to me.
Yeah.
And I waited a day and the email come back and it said, I'm sorry, son, there can be no fellowship with an unbeliever. And this was his version of tough love, right? Accepting me as a person was kind of a de facto acceptance of my atheism.
Yeah.
So he felt there had to be a distance. And even
Wow.
with mom, there was like an emotional disconnect. They say, we love you, but it's sort of a conditional kind of thing. And I found there were lots of boundary violations. We often let families do and say things that we wouldn't allow from anybody else.
Yeah.
They step into the threshold of our lives. They tell us who to marry. They tell us what job to do. They tell us how to vote. They tell us what denomination or church to go to because they think they've got permission. And, oh, it's your mother. Oh, it's your father. Oh, it's your sibling. We tend to say, oh, well, they're family, so they get a different set of rules. And I finally came to a point in my life where I realized, no, I mean, if it's inappropriate, it's inappropriate. And so I
Right.
set a hard boundary after years of discussions and said, my journey belongs to me. This is my line. You do not have permission to say and do these awful things and the health threats and you're embarrassing the family and all the other things they said. You do not have permission to do that. If it happens again, I will remove you from my life. It was a very difficult day. And I
Yeah.
remember Natalie was listening on the phone when I had that conversation with my mother. And 2 days passed and there was the next boundary violation, it's just, and so blocked on the phone and blocked on the email and we haven't had a relationship for years. And I've had to come to terms with the reality that this is not my fault.
Right.
It hurts,
Yeah.
but I think respect includes self-respect, right?
Right.
I've got to have enough self-respect to say that no one else can step into my home and
Right.
tell me who I am. And I still hold out hope that one day, she's 85. I'm hoping that at some point maybe she'll come back and say the words of conciliation and reconciliation, and we'll have a moment. But I don't know. It's a long ass story, Timmy.
Yeah.
you know, but it's hard. And what's interesting is I get a lot of messages from people who go through the same thing. They're
Yeah.
like, I don't want to go to family Thanksgiving because of the way they treat me. And
Yeah.
I'm terrified to let my kids go and stay with grandpa and grandma because they're going to sneak them off to church when I'm not looking, and all these other boundary violations. And boy, the boundary conversation is one I've been having a lot with people over the past decade. So
Yeah. Yeah, I had to have a real come to Jesus talk, if you will, with my folks. I said, "Hey, listen, if you're going to constantly berate me with telling me, that I'm going to hell and,
yeah,
all these things." I said, that's just not how the kind of relationship that we need to be in. There's a lot of other things that we can talk about, there should be a lot of other things that we can talk about outside of your particular perspective or interpretation of scripture. And it was a hard talk, and it took them a minute to finally get there. But they got there, and we're still in relationship. I mean, it's they don't go to church or anything, but they're super evangelical and have, just in my opinion, just a bunch of really wacky beliefs, which is funny because I used to believe the same way. But
mm,
once you've been at it for a minute, you kind of look back and you're like, wow, I didn't realize how wacky some of that stuff was. I was having a conversation with an evangelical friend my age. We're having a beer together, and we were just, he knows I'm atheist now, and so he was asking me questions. I was asking him questions, and I said, "Well, how do you explain the age of the Earth?" He goes, "Well, it's 6,000 years old." I said, "Well, but what about like science and carbon dating and dinosaur bones and fossils, Neanderthal bones, and like all these things that are confirmed, like it's for sure older than 6,000 years structures." Seth, I swear, he said, "Well, I believe God just created it with all that stuff in it." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "All the dinosaur bones and all the fossils, God created the earth old." And I was like, "Well, okay."
so it's a young Earth, but he made everything to look dated.
So he's deceptive.
Awesome,
Right. So
awesome.
I am curious. So in those conversations with your folks, especially since they were so Bible literate, what did they ever give any answer that made you go,
Mm-mm.
or were most of them just like what you said, just like
Well,
that makes no sense?
before I had come from that attitude of acceptance and deference, and it's amazing the stuff we can rationalize when we want to. And this isn't just religious, this is any identity belief. Um, but nothing, I mean, it didn't make any difference. The Genesis story, and we talked about the fact that all geological evidence refutes the global flood, and then mom started to invoke the creation museum. So I thought, well, so I got into the creation. What's that? Holy shit, that place is a freaking nightmare. And
Right.
and then, the more they explained it, the less it worked. And a lot of that was that I was no longer responding with deference to an authority that told me how it is. And,
Right.
we see this in the church, especially fundy faiths. I don't know if it was the case with you as much, because I think you really had more of an egalitarian, love people kind of a vibe. But when you go to a Bible literalist church, and people hear what the pastor says and they soak it up and they go off into their lives. How often do people go and say, "Well, that didn't sound right. Let's go check that out." Right? I don't know. Let's do our own thinking.
Yeah.
God appointed his shepherd on earth. We are the sheep. And so the shepherd leads us and we receive the good word, and then we go off into our lives until the next time that we receive the good word. It is not a critical thinking culture in so many ways. And man, when you start to ask questions and expect good answers other than you got to take it on faith and the Bible tells me so and blah, 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 man, it's amazing. All of a sudden, the house of cards falls down. And then you're looking around going, well, what now?
Yeah.
And in my own life, I had to go case by case through all the stuff that I used to believe about the world. And I went back to square one and thought, okay, hang on. I gotta go and check this out from scratch. So all my philosophies for living, how did I feel about drugs? I used to be weird about weed and oh my God, it's marijuana. Well, how do I feel about that now?
I
The
love
death
that stuff.
penalty. No, I'm sorry. I've heard I had my first gummy a few months ago. It was quite an experience. So um how do I feel about the death penalty? I used to be kind of an eye for an eye guy, so I had to go back and do my own homework on the death penalty, and I switched on that. And how do I feel about the role of government? And how do I feel about healthcare and LGBT marriage? And just boom, 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 boom. And I realized once I actually got here organically, I walked away almost a different person, a better person than I was before. I think you felt the same way as you mentioned earlier. So.
Yeah, I often say that the deconstruction was just a part of my journey. And I'm still in the reconstruction because there are still things that I have views on that I think come from my upbringing, you know, and um, it's still a journey. And so, what do you do, or what did you do in those early days? Because yeah, it's a mind shift. I
Yeah.
mean, it really Christianity is a very strong and specific worldview, and especially because it's almost synonymous, religious, Republican, conservative,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
and so
Jesus is a Republican kind of a vibe in the
right.
country these days. Yeah, Jesus is a capitalist conservative Republican. Yeah,
Right.
sure.
And I've been, shifting and shifting and shifting and shifting and have still in the process of shifting. Where did you find the best resources for genuine real study where you were really able to hear clearly both sides, or at least a different perspective than maybe what you had grown up always thinking and knowing, to help you really land on what you were looking and what you were thinking, that this is true, like this is
Yeah,
true.
yeah. Well, at the beginning of my journey, it was right there when the quote unquote new atheists were hot. Yeah, it was the God Delusion, Richard Dawkins, and Sam Harris, Letter to a Christian Nation, and they
Yeah.
were just going hard at religion. Christopher Hitchens, but when it came to a better understanding of the world, man, and I'm still talk about a journey, and that's the beauty of it, right? You and I there's not a destination where we're like, yes, I have arrived.
Right.
Every day we're, sponging up something new, and we're prepared to adjust or course correct when we need to, and that's actually an amazing thing. But I began to read a lot of Carl Sagan and discovered the wonder of the universe.
Mhm.
I began to read about evolution by actual evolutionary biologists, and studying the history of religions. What do different faiths think, and it's almost like a Mexican food. Whenever you look at the fundy faiths, and you're like, no matter what you order, it's mostly just the same ingredients. I'd like a taco. What's on that? Well, that's tortilla, lettuce, cheese, meat, tomato. Okay, well, I'll take a tostada. Well, what's on that? Well, tortilla, lettuce, beef, cheese, tomato. Well, I'd like an enchilada. Well, what's on that? Tortilla, beef, they just arrange them in different ways. Now, they got a higher power. There's a paradise. There might be a hell. There's a dogma. There's commands. There's holy books, etc. And that sort of liberated me. But I did a lot of just reading from evolutionary biologists about and watching a lot of content online. Boy, the internet is a scary place, but can also be an amazing place.
Yeah.
And I've got resources on my own website. If you go to thethinkingatheist.com, I've actually got links for YouTubers and for authors and for podcasters and other websites. And you can just go and scroll through and click through. And I haven't updated it in, a while, but I think the links are pretty good. So, I mean, there are
Yeah.
books to read, and there are things that can help kickstart people on their journey, depending on what they want to start with. Do you want to get into debunking Christianity? You want to learn how evolution works? Do you want to learn about the singularity and the Big Bang and the origins of the cosmos? Or you want to get more into humanism and how do we solve each other's problems on this crazy planet? So I tried to assemble a fair list of beginning resources for people who are on a journey there. Thinkingatheist.com. So
Yeah. So you just went to the Atheist Conference. Was that up in Minnesota?
yeah, I went to the American Atheist National Convention. I serve on their board of directors, and they had me speak Friday night. A
Very
speech
cool.
that I am releasing, I recorded it in Calgary about a week ago, and it's called Dissent is Our Duty. And I was trying to come up with something that spoke to our cultural moment because I think there's a cancer of hopelessness and we're overwhelmed, we're disoriented, we're confused, we feel despair. I mean, it's only been 110 days or whatever. And we're just like, oh, you know, it's literally a fire hose to the face every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is strategic. This is what the opposition wants. Their strategy is to hit us with several things a day that keep us distracted, that exhaust us, that overwhelm us. And then we either go the wrong direction or we just check out.
Yeah.
And the more we do that, the more they get away with. I mean, this is being done on purpose, it's by design. And so I wanted to get into that. And I wanted to talk about why we shouldn't be totally hopeless, how we need to focus on ourselves and each other, and what's possible when good people rise up together.
Yeah.
And so it's called Dissent is Our Duty. It will release to YouTube on, I think, the 12th or I think the 13th of this month, May. And you can just go to thethinkingatheist.com and the speech video should be front and center right there. And it's something I'm really proud of. And I think it's something people really can benefit from. It's not false hope. It's not a Lifetime movie. I'm not like, yeah, man, we can do it in that sort of saccharine way that makes you want to throw up in your mouth.
Yeah.
Like I don't take you here, but I am taking you kind of here. Like we are going to try. I really want to give myself and the world a shot in the arm.
Yeah.
And so that's what that presentation is. And I'm pretty proud of it. We'll see how the audiences react here in a few days. So,
Yeah. I find it pretty almost just unbelievable, really, how toxic the fundamental evangelical faith really is. And especially some of the branches, the charismatic, the Kenneth Copeland people of the world. I mean, he is just an absolute con artist, and he looks like Satan would look. I mean, he literally really just has such an evil, nasty face.
He's got such in the faith, we'd call it a countenance. There's
Yeah.
something about him that is so off-putting. And then you realize that people have given him a net worth of $750 million.
Unbelievable. It is
And
unbelievable.
dude, I was scrolling. I couldn't sleep the other night in a hotel on the road. And I was on the television just looking for something to watch. Freaking Peter Popoff,
No
the
way.
televangelist who was exposed 40 years ago for using an earpiece on
Yeah.
a radio to supposedly hear the voice of God, right? He's debunked. And he literally is like the styrofoam ball that won't sink. He continues to just pop up, and he is on the air selling little packets of miracle spring water. People have made him a millionaire many times over. And I just think it's at those moments I do think maybe we deserve the killer asteroid.
Right.
Just let's get a lawn chair and let's go out to the big field and let's just drink a Mai Tai and say, it's been fun, but maybe we deserve extinction. But
It
no.
is. I mean, yeah, Jim Baker is still down, in Branson on some little TV network, his own little show. Yeah, making millions of dollars. Yeah, selling the sands of the whatever. It's
Oh, he was selling those
colloidal.
food buckets for the apocalypse. Did you see those things?
Yes, I did.
And the best part about that, he's selling all this doomsday material. Oh, when the apocalypse comes, you're going to need to survive. And I'm like, well, why would his people need to survive? They're going to be taken up to
We're gonna be
Jesus.
raptured out of here, right?
Yeah.
What's up?
So instead, but he's, such a fear pimp. He's throwing all this food out in a bucket. And what I saw in the latest one, he's got a toilet seat attachment. So once you've eaten all the food out of the bucket, then you take the toilet seat and you fasten it to the top of the bucket, and then you can poop everything out that you've just eaten. Just awesome. Yeah, we deserve the killer asteroid. I think.
Yeah, I that kind of stuff. It is surprising. There's so many things that have been debunked so clearly, and it's just shocking to me when you encounter people who believe something that we know isn't true. It's one thing to say it's an opinion, it's a theory. What I get it. It's fine. There are some things we don't know, but there are some things that we know with absolute certainty, and yet Adam and Eve are real.
I think there's so many gears in that machine too. I think a lot of people have such a sincere desire to believe that they're easy meat. Or in a lot of these sociopaths and con artists have radar, and they can find people at a vulnerable moment. I mean, you think about their demographic. Somebody's got cancer. Well, God will heal you. Send me your check. Somebody's child is missing. You know what? Nothing is hidden from Jesus's sight. Send in your gift and we'll pray for them. And when you're selling hope to hopeless people, they're just vampires.
Yeah.
And I think we have to look on those victims with compassion and understand that, we've all had horrible ideas and we've all been taken in by somebody. And I'm not talking about the sociopaths who were, I don't have compassion for Ken Copeland,
Right.
but I'll tell you, I do have compassion for most of the people that he has taken in and sold a lie to, because they have a desire to believe. Maybe they hate this life and they're craving the next because maybe there's no suffering there. There's a thousand reasons people will fall for this stuff, and all we can do, and I think this speaks to one of the challenges we have outside the faith, that religion provides such as a net for people to rest in, even if it's made of bad material, that if we say, look, it's not true, we're going to have to provide a landing place for them as a replacement. We're not just saying leave the church and your belief. We're saying leave your friends. No, we don't want that really, but that's what they hear. Leave the child care for your kid, divorce recovery, addiction recovery, the people you hang with on weekends. The idea that you're going to be reunited with grandma in heaven, all of those types of things. Well, man, those are great mechanisms to keep people locked in. I think we have to solve human problems and create love, support, community, etc., outside the church, so that they have a place to go. Because if they don't have a place to go, there's not much reason for them to leave. And I think we as non-believers, we have a lot of work to do in the community subject. We like to often think that, well, I'm not a herd. I'm not, I'm not a sheep. I'm not a joiner. But the truth is we're human beings and life is better together, and we need community. We need each other, and we need to take care of each other.
Yeah. How'd you do that early on? I don't know how you are. I can be a little bit of a loner and it's okay. I mean, my job puts me out in front of people. I'm always in front of people. But I'm also okay to be alone or have, my couple friends, especially now, with my wife. We just celebrated our second year in marriage. But yeah, it's just, I don't need a huge group of friends, but that's one of the things that what people ask, what was the hardest thing to walk away from when you walked away from religion? And honestly, it was the community. Like, it was that community meeting weekly and gathering and hanging out.
I'm like you. I call it selectively social. A lot of people don't realize I'm an introvert. People hear the word introvert and they think shy. Well, that's not what an introvert is. I can keep my own company extremely well. I love people and I love to be engaged with people. But once my social battery is dead, like if I'm at a convention, I'll go up to the room for an hour and I'll just sit in the dark and just recharge. Like I literally exhaust me,
Yeah.
And a lot of people are that way. But when I left the faith at first, there weren't many options. One of the reasons I started an online community is because I thought, well, if I can't find one, I'll build one. There were a few atheist websites, but I couldn't find a hub that people were acting and interacting. So whenever I launched the website in 2009, it had a forum where people could go in and they could connect with each other and I could connect with them. And we often surrender to the church this idea of community. I mean, the church does it incredibly well. We like to, some people are like, well, if a bunch of non-believers, atheists, humanists, seculars, whatever, all get together, that's a religious exercise. And I'm like, no. You just surrendered to the church what human beings did long before the church. The church does it really well.
Right.
But, if getting together to share goals, make friends, do things, if that's religious, then a rock concert is religious. Bowling night is religious. A pizza party is religious. We are, I think we're a species that is a social species. And, if we don't believe in gods and monsters, who else is going to solve our problems? I think we have to be there for each other and we have to stop apologizing and allowing other people to tell us that if I go to a convention or go to secular Houston or an Oasis event in Kansas City or something, that I'm going to atheist or secular church. It's not church. It's just it's community, and human beings have been doing community since there have been human beings.
Yeah. Yeah, you had on Dave Fitzgerald, and I did too, the mythicist.
Mhm.
Where are you at with Jesus?
Was there a real Jesus?
Yeah, I'm just. I mean, that question just
Yeah,
popped in my mind.
I don't know. I'm not smart enough to figure this one out. I mean, for me, it's all academic because we know that the God man Jesus, there's no reason to buy any of that.
Right.
But was there an actual charismatic Jesus figure, a guy that the myth was built on? Maybe. I mean, the historicists say that, well, yeah, absolutely. And the mythicists say, no, he was borrowed from a bunch of other ideas and totally fabricated. These are interesting conversations, but I don't know. But for me, that's great coffee table conversation. But as long as we know that the God man, the superstitious Jesus, the superstition didn't exist, I think, I can build on that. And the rest is interesting, but whatever. Doesn't
Yeah.
really affect me either way.
Yeah, I kind of have the same view. I believe that, with Bart Ehrman, he probably was an actual Jesus dude.
Yeah.
Clearly, there was no miracle worker, Jesus. No one was walking on water.
Yeah.
That's for sure. So going back again to your early deconstruction process, so what were some of the big pillars that fell? Like, just to kind of jog your thoughts. Like for me, like you, I had some gay friends. That was something I scratched out. The 7 verses in the Bible that say that that's wrong. That was one of the first things that dropped. And then this whole idea of, I'm going to heaven, and anyone who doesn't accept Jesus is all going to hell, whether they're good or not. Even the sweet, kind, caring Jewish lady that's always served God. That pillar, which is a huge pillar, right? Because I mean, Jesus is the way, the only way. That one fell. And I even really started thinking, well, man, can you be a Christian and not believe that Jesus is the way? Now, at this point, I'm a pastor. Like, I have a church, 300 people, and I'm going through this struggle in my mind where if someone asked me, Timmy, do you think that a Jewish person is going to go to hell? I mean, it caused me to hem-haw around and backpedal and go, oh, look, squirrel.
Yeah.
I mean, I did not feel comfortable answering that. In fact, I can't tell you, because that's a question I love to ask people now when they're a Christian. I just go straight for the gullet and say, what about a kind, caring, wonderful Jewish lady that spent her whole life serving God? Do you think she's going to go to hell and burn forever and ever? I've yet to find, I mean, I say that's not true. I've had a couple Christians go, yep, she's going to burn in hell. I didn't write the book, and they can just go there, which seems just so effed up.
Oh,
But
the one that I do,
yeah.
not to derail you, but the one that I do is, do you think Abraham was a hero of the faith? Absolutely. Do you think obedience to God was one of the things that made him great? Yes, absolutely. And so I'll say, if God came to you the way he appeared to Abraham and he asked you to kill your son or daughter on the altar, would you be as faithful as Abraham? And would you kill your child? Blows their mind.
Yeah.
I've had a few people say, yes, that's terrifying. But mostly, it's one of the first times they've actually put themselves in the shoes of a Bible character. And they're like, well, no, I wouldn't do that. Some people say they'd rather be judged by God than harm their own child. And I'm like, thank you, right? Because the decision you made, you just made a moral decision outside of your faith.
Yeah.
And you did it because you felt it was the right thing. And I try to give them credit for that, but it totally rattles their cage. And then, I've had one guy, I asked him that question. He came back a couple of years later and he was an atheist. He said that
Interesting.
one seed caused him to wonder, wait a minute. And then he went through that same sort of stair step journey out, man. So anyway, I didn't mean to derail you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Popped
Well, that
into
was
my
one of the
mind.
questions a friend of mine asked me. They said, what if you're wrong?
Yeah.
And what was interesting is they were asking it in a different context. They said, what if you're wrong? What if Hinduism is true? Because they can't all be true. Clearly, none of them are true. And that question just really caught me off guard because I thought, oh, how
Yeah.
do I know like that Christianity is true and not Hinduism?
Oh, I'll
'Cause-
walk in and say, when I'm talking to a believer, I'll say, well, is there anything that anyone could say to make you change your mind on Christianity? And they'll go, nope. And I'll just say, okay, great.
Yeah.
And I'll just walk away.
Yeah.
Well, hang on just a second. Don't you want to talk about it? And I'm like, well, I mean, I just saved us both a whole bunch of time,
Yeah.
right? You've told me that you're not going to budge.
Yeah.
So if you and I were to discuss or talk about the ins and outs of it, it sounds to me like that's not incredibly productive.
Yeah.
But if you do get to a point where you think you would change your mind when presented with an idea that you thought might make more sense, you call me and we'll talk. And it rattles them. They're not expecting that. They're expecting a fight
Right.
or an engagement. Instead, I'm like, will anything change your mind? No, nothing will change my mind. Okay, cool. All right, we'll catch you later. See ya.
Yeah.
Have a good day.
So your faith wasn't like there wasn't like a sinkhole that just opened up and it all fell out. So
Not at once.
the LGBTQ plus issues, some of the what else? Like what were you holding on to? Was it like pillar by pillar by pillar by pillar, or a few cards fell and it all just came crashing down? I mean, what were the first few? Because for me, it really was, the inerrancy of the Bible. Okay, it's not inerrant. Clearly, there's contradiction. Like it just piece by piece by piece for me.
Yeah, I think being inside all those churches, being in Christian radio and seeing sort of the inner workings and being in all those churches where the doctrine of church A was a little different than the doctrine of church B, which is a little different than the doctrine of church C. And I'm like, for the God who's not the author of confusion, there appear to be thousands of different conflict. I mean, how many times have people left a church because they thought, well, their doctrine's wrong, so I'm going to this church that fits my doctrine? How many times have churches split over doctrine or some dumb thing? And I remember that was kind of a big deal. When I first was presented with the reality that human beings are animals, because I resisted that, right?
Yeah.
Well, we're a separate thing. There are animals and then there are humans. And then,
Mhm.
of course, it was explained to me what the biology of an animal is. And then I heard this one. Well, we're mammals, but we're not animals. Well, wait a minute. It's like saying I'm a dog, but I'm not a canine kind of thing. Is that what that is? And then, human beings we have 99.9% of the DNA of the chimpanzee. We're genetically closer to chimps than chimps even are to gorillas. I mean, whoa, I remember thinking, okay, I mean, that started to really get me. Um, Evolution I used to be threatened by it. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was
Yeah.
stupid,
Right.
right? I didn't know why. Like, I never took an evolutionary biology class, not once. But they taught us to make fun of Darwin whenever
Right.
we were in school. Darwinism. They think from goo to the zoo to you. That's where we came from. We crawled out of the muck. Blah blah blah. But when I began to actually understand my common ancestry and my relation to the living world at a cellular level, I remember not feeling as threatened as much as I felt kind of like wonder, like, whoa, uh, I don't feel less special. I don't feel less important. The universe may not care if I exist, but I mean, I still have value. And, those types of things, I'd sort of a discovery of the world. I sort of was born when I was 37. Is that weird?
No,
Like,
yeah.
I was born at the age of 37. And, uh, and now every day gets to be a discovery. Sometimes when I sign like something for a young person and they come up with these wide eyes, I will write that. I'll be like, make every day a discovery. And I'll sign my
Yeah.
name, and I'll encourage him, go out and be a little scientist. And if you learn something I didn't know, then let me know because I
Mm.
want to improve my position. And boy, you foster that. If you teach a child how to think instead of what to think, and you don't kill that naturally curious mind and heart, man. It's just it's wondrous. I don't know. I just fell in love with not knowing all the answers and
Yeah.
thought that's okay. And it gives me a chance to learn more tomorrow than I knew today. And that's pretty amazing for me. So
A lot of people that go through the deconstruction process, Seth, they'll ask me, do you still struggle with, do you ever struggle with the idea of what if I'm wrong and I'm dooming myself to hell? Or, what if God really is real and I'm going to be judged? Or how did you handle that? And did you go through much of that
oh yeah.
for a minute? And how did you kind of get over the fear of hell, which was drilled into both of our heads all of our lives?
Well, they brand hell onto a lot of people. And when you're a kid, I mean, they showed us the apocalypse films when I was in Christian school. A Thief in the Night, A Distant
Oh,
Thunder, and
same.
Image of the Beast, right?
Yeah.
Where Jesus comes back and the unbelievers are left here, and then the meat grinder of the tribulation happens, and people are arrested and they get their heads chopped off, and there are monsters, and there's blood and pain and fire and all. I mean, it was terrifying to somebody like me. And that's burned onto young minds and hearts early. Churches call it the 4 to 14 window. It's critical we get these kids early, because if you try to teach this stuff for the first time after they've hit 15, 16, they're going to look at you like you're insane, like you got two heads. And but that fear of hell, and it once you've deconstructed, it's totally irrational,
Yeah.
but it didn't go away.
Right.
So 2008, right? I say I'm an atheist, but I still was up at night thinking, what if I'm wrong? I don't want to go to hell. What if I'm wrong? I don't want to go to hell. And it just tells you the power
Mm.
that scaring someone, right, to really fuck up their emotions in that way. It's a kind of abuse, even when it's done sincerely with the best of
Right.
intentions. We want to rescue our child from damnation.
Yeah.
It took me a few years, and for me, the journey was to go back and sort of reverse engineer. Okay, well, the hell theology comes from where? And how has it been used to control people? And if this has been debunked in the Bible, why would I hold to the idea, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into a lake of everlasting fire"? Why would I believe that when I don't believe in the talking snake, right? And I just sort of, and then I spent time with people who had also deconstructed and gotten over their fear, and I got encouragement from them. But it took me a couple of years. Here's a story. I don't mean to hold you up too much, but
Yeah. No, this is good.
this is the analogy that I like to use. So Natalie's got a grandkid. He's my grandkid, sort of, but I think he is, even though it's I'm a step grandfather, I guess, or whatever.
Yeah.
And but I love Halloween. at our house, and I had this big 7-foot tall skeleton statue. And he had like red eyes and he had a voice. You know, he had this machine that was like, oh, warning unto thee who enter here. You know, it's this big thing. And it was just fun. And I had him on my front porch for Halloween the entire month of October. Well, when he was young, really small, he was scared. I didn't want to go through the front door because of the scary guy. That's what he called him. I don't want to go near the scary guy. I was like, no problem. So we'd open the garage door and we'd go in the house. And so Halloween the next year, I used the same decoration, but here's what I did. I said, hey, Braden, come here. Here's my box with all these pieces in it. Let me show you how the scary guy works. And now when he saw the pieces, he didn't flip out.
Yeah.
So I said, well, here's the base. And all right, now let's pop this in here. All right, now these are going to be the legs. Okay, now see this? It's made of plastic. Wow, let's put this on here now. Oh, you want to here's the cape that goes around his shoulders. You see this box? We're going to plug it in. It's got cords that go into the wall and it's got a recording that makes his voice. Wow. And we put it together. And then we both set it on the front porch and plugged it in and tested it. And he's just sitting there just like wide-eyed. And the next time he came over to my house, he said, I'm not afraid of the scary guy anymore. And we walked through the front door right by it. And the reason it wasn't scary to him is because he had seen how the inner workings operate. He had seen all the pieces and what they did and how they fit together. And it demystified it for him. And then he was so proud of himself. And this is what a lot of people do with hell theology. They find out, well, what are the pieces? Where do they come from? They're obviously human made. Okay, well, what happens when they do this? Well, it's scary to a lot of people, but now that I know how it works, it doesn't scare me anymore. And I always found that was a great story to tell people who are navigating their own fears of hell. Once you learn how it works, it demystifies it and it liberates you and you're not afraid anymore. So,
Yeah. Yeah. You know, for me, it was just like a moment of, I just like everybody, you know, you go through that, hey, I like your coffee cup there. I collect these, the Starbucks cup. I don't drink Starbucks coffee, but I drink I use their mugs. For me, it was just like an all of a sudden, oh, it's not true. I mean, it was just like, it's like I didn't grieve over the loss of Santa for, you know, more than a day or two. It just all of a sudden, it just all fell away. And I'm not sure, when some people talk about years of belaboring and fearing and wondering, am I making the right decision? You know, what if it is real? I honestly, I just can't relate to that going on for years and years and years, because it just became so clear to me. This is made up. There's zero evidence for it. Why would I give it any credence at all? I mean, I get accused of mocking God. I did a little short video that it is completely mocking, which is why I did it. But I'm speaking in tongues in this little short, and then I get slain in the spirit. And when I come up, I have my Bubba teeth in.
love it.
And I'm like, I'm filled with the Holy Spirit. And this video got, I mean, I don't know, it's at 50,000, I think, at this point. It's just a little short. And I mean, that thing has thousands of comments of people going, you better be careful, mocking the Lord. Rah, rah, rah. I mean, you can imagine, Seth. I'm sure you get the same kind of stuff, you know, and I tend not to, I'll read some of my comments, you know, of all the good comments. And if something's thoughtful from a Christian, I'll read it and see if it's a genuine question. But I don't, you know, take in all the negative comments. But I mean, this video pretty much only has either people say, I literally peed my pants, Timmy, and I can't stop watching this video. It's so funny, to, you know, God is going to get me, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, how can you mock something that's not real?
Some of that is a liberation exercise. I don't mock believers one-on-one, but I think there is utility in knocking down off the perch the things that used to scare us. You know?
Absolutely.
the things that used to control us. I think ridicule and mockery in many ways can be a liberation exercise where we're saying through sort of punchlining them that you don't have any power over me anymore. I'm not afraid. I did a speech in Colorado 10 years ago and it freaked some atheists out. But at the end, I put up a picture of like a generated picture of Satan. I said, you know what, everybody? I'm going to sacrifice myself for all of you to prove that if God exists, and so I prayed to God from the stage and I said, I will sacrifice myself to Satan and I will send myself to hell. If you will demonstrate your presence here, I'm willing to take that. And Satan, if I call out to you, I offer myself to you, come get me. And your presence will then prove the existence of Yahweh, because if Satan exists, we know the biblical God exists. And I sort of put my arms out and waited for damnation to happen. And it was my way of saying, I'm not afraid of monsters anymore. This has no power. But there are people who were atheists who came to me afterward and they said, I wanted to crawl under my chair. I was scared.
Interesting.
It freaked me out. And I thought, well, that shows you how deep seated these fears are and how they can embed them in your heart. And so I was hoping by showing courage myself, that I might encourage other people to do the same. But sometimes you got to roast the sacred cows, man.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's good to do that.
It really is. It's been therapeutic for me, Seth. Yeah, I have no problem. I mock, people joke or talk about my preacher voice. I'll get on and say, I've got the Holy Spirit gonna come down, blah, 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 and I do all this stuff. And most people, of course, the atheists just love it. Other people take it as mockery, but I'm with you. It's like, no, guys, it should be ridiculed. It's not true.
Yeah.
And you're believing it as it is true. This is ridiculous. And the further I've gotten away from it, and last time, actually, this is the first time I've ever had you on my YouTube channel. I had you on my podcast. I think at the time if I go back and listen to the podcast on Spotify, which I don't do anymore, I'm not techie enough to know how to put these over there too. But anyway, you and I talked, and I think at the time I was more curious about your atheism because I think I was spiritual, not religious at the time.
Yeah.
And, I was definitely heading that way. And I remember you said something, I'll have to go back and listen to it, but you said something about basically that you'll get there, Timmy.
Did I say
and
that?
I was like, I think you said something like that. It was you said it in a great way. It was fine. And I remember thinking to myself, I can't be atheist, Seth. I think I'm stopping right here. And, once you get to sliding down, it just, for me personally, I slid right through. I'm spiritual, not religious. I slid right out of that and was like, wait a minute. None of this shit's true. I don't believe in ghosts or goblins or spirits or any of this stuff. There's no evidence for it whatsoever. And I think I've just become, I don't care what I hear. I'm like, well, what's the evidence for that? Like, let's dig into that. I don't care. I mean, if I hear anything, I'm like, I'll get back to you. let me go search out what the experts are saying. Well, Joe Rogan said it. Well, I don't give a shit what he said. I want to go find out what the experts are saying about this. Not just some, podcaster.
Well, some people have asked, well, hasn't this turned your life upside down? And I always say, well, actually, leaving Christianity helped to turn my life right side up.
Absolutely.
I feel more comfortable in my own skin than I ever have. I'm happier than I've ever been.
Me too.
I'm living an authentic life, which is remarkable. So, I'd never take whatever pill puts you back in the matrix, man. I'm good. I'm happy.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I'm sure you feel this way, at least I would assume. I think I'm at a place in my life, Seth, I honestly can't believe that people believe it. I do sometimes think, is this a mirror? What's that show? Black Mirror.
mm-hmm.
Is this a Black Mirror episode? Like what is going on? And it's weird to have been a Bible thumping, believing, tongue talking, to have been that guy. It's like it's another person, because I look back on my life and on some of my beliefs, which, I can access. They're in here. And I can't believe I believed it. I can't believe that I bought into all of the stuff that there's just zero, they're just factless, made up things.
Well, I think one upside to you being and me being having been so immersed in true belief is that, first of all, we can reveal that many, many good people who are religious, they don't deserve to be vilified. They're not mentally ill. A lot of the stuff I hear atheists throw at them, and your experience in the faith gives you the equity to be able to speak about so many of these things with an insider's perspective. So when somebody comes to you and they've come out of the church, or somebody has a challenge, or needs someone to relate to, or whatever, or maybe even has a question about how the whole machine works, one upside is that your decades in the faith have really given you a perspective that makes you more effective at what you do today. And you and I make the guarantee to anybody that if a God shows up tomorrow, we would want to know that, right?
Yeah.
So if a God shows up, whoever she is, call me. I want to know that, and we'll figure that out when it happens. And I think that's that kind of I make that assurance to believers all the time.
Yeah.
If there's a God and that God shows up, I want to know that, and I promise I will have an open mind, and we'll have that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw a debate. That was probably some of my early journey too. I started watching debates, and the atheist was just making so much more sense.
Yeah.
In fact, there was one debate in particular, and I think it was with Ken Ham, which that was a hard one to get through anytime he opened his mouth. But basically, the interviewer said, "Hey, what would change your mind to both of them? What would change your mind to the atheist, and what would change your mind to the Christian?" The Christian was like, "Absolutely nothing. If God's word says it, that settles it, and I believe it." I mean, he's one of those guys. And I thought, what a moron, because then the scientist said, evidence? Like, what would change my mind would be evidence.
Yeah.
And I
That was
thought,
Bill
man,
Nye.
that's a good Bill Nye. That's
Yeah,
right. It was
Bill
Bill
Nye
Nye.
debating Ken Ham. Yeah. It
Yeah.
was a great way. It was a great question. What would it take to change your mind? And I think it exposed Ken Ham as being a closed system. This is not how, this is not how we live our lives. You don't reject evidence that doesn't already confirm what you believe. That's not how facts work. So
Yeah. Yeah. And understanding confirmation bias, that was a really important thing. I've been watching a lot of videos now recently on critical thinking and being a real critical thinker about so many things. Cause now, in the world of politics, I'm old enough to remember when you could, talk about who you're voting for, and it was no big deal. I mean, you could sit around the coffee table. You voting for? I'm voting for Clinton. I'm voting for Bush. Or I'm voting for Reagan. Or I mean, everybody, it didn't seem, at least in my mind, it didn't seem to be that big of an issue. And now things seem so polarizing and so just divided, and an us and a them. It's just absolutely insane out there. And everything I hear, I have to go dig deep. Like, let me go find out if that's actually true.
yeah.
Because
Well,
you can't trust anything.
it was polarized when I was growing up. We were very much better dead than Democrat type people. And
Interesting.
we were hardcore.
Yeah.
We were Ronald Reagan conservatives, William F. Buckley conservatives, Fox News conservatives. We were very much that way. I was weaned on Rush Limbaugh, for Pete's sake.
Oh gosh, yeah, me too.
So it was one of those things where we actually felt that conservative values were Christian values and vice versa. And
Absolutely.
so it was polarizing for us, but I think everybody's experience is unique.
Yeah. Yeah, I did find that funny. I remember, Fox News being touted as, that's the real news. They tell the truth. CNN is full of lies.
Yeah.
Like, what?
I wrote a whole book. It's called Confessions of a Former Fox News Christian, where it talks about the this sort of genesis of Fox News dating back into really the 50s and the 60s, and the elimination of the fairness doctrine, and how broadcasting itself changed in a way that led to right-wingism, and Rupert Murdoch, and sort of how this entire media industry has And then we get into how Fox News feeds on and feeds into and then is fed from the culture. It's really a vicious cycle. And it's a closed system. People who watch right-wing media, it's interesting. We don't live in a shared reality, and it's
Right.
so polished. I was at a hotel the other day waiting on my shuttle to the airport, and they had Fox News on in the lobby. And I remember there for 15 minutes, I thought, this is so polished that if this was my only outlet for information, I would have a very different view of the world.
Yeah.
And, I've been out there trying to sound the alarm, trying to, tell people that what they are selling and what is happening are not the same things. And, those of us who came out of a propaganda culture know the power of propaganda. And so, anyway, I'm
Yeah.
just, it's just one of those things. But the two, conservatism and Christianity, do seem to be married in a great many ways.
Yeah, which is just so ironic. Okay, a little exercise that I was excited to do this with you, because you and I could just talk for a long time, it seems. I'm going to give you a name, and you just go off the cuff of what you think. Tucker Carlson.
We did a show on Tucker right after he left Fox News. He's just a cretin. I mean, the guy he's sexist. He is bigoted. He's a conspiracist. I think he's a con man and grifter. He's just an awful human being. I don't say that easily about a lot of people, but he's the worst of us. Tucker
Yeah.
Carlson, yeah.
Barack Obama.
I miss him. I miss complete sentences.
Yeah.
I missed kindness. I missed the presidentialness of him. I miss his egalitarianism, his compassion for people, how much he genuinely loves his family. I miss the sound of his voice. He is. I don't deify the man. We're all human beings,
Sure.
but if they make it a constitutional possibility that a president can run for a third term and then weasel Obama out of it, if he ran again, I'd be there. Hey, go get it. Go
Yeah.
help fix it. Yeah, sure.
Donald Trump.
He is everything that we teach our children not to be. Liar, cheat, bully, grifter, sexist, predator. It's funny. The evangelicals in my circle that support and even worship this man, if they had raised a child who had behaved in the way that he had, hey, mom, I didn't let black people into the apartment complex that I owned until a court ordered me to do so. Hey, dad, I cheated college students with a fake university. Hey, I stole from a children's charity. Hey, I creeped through a Miss Teen USA dressing room and checked out their bodies because they let me do it. I grabbed them by the pussy. You know, I'm I bullied somebody. I didn't pay my vendors because I could out lawyer them, and it's awesome. I mean, I took vengeance on somebody that I hate. If these Trump voters had a child or a spouse or a friend who had boasted about those same things, they'd feel horrified, and rightly so.
Yeah.
And to watch them embrace the agent, really the poster child for cruelty by the tens of millions, to me, it makes my heart hurt and it makes me fear for the future.
Yeah. Sam Harris.
I don't really know much about Sam. He was there for me in my early journey, but I think he kind of got away from the atheist space and started doing more philosophy and stuff. So, I mean, I don't really know what he's up to. It's been maybe a decade since I followed his work.
Yeah. Richard Dawkins.
Richard wrote the foreword to the second edition of my autobiography.
Oh, very
Uh,
cool.
we've been friendly. We're not, I'm not pals with Richard, it's not like we
Sure.
hang out. And the God delusion was seismic for me in my own journey, is seismic. In recent years, he's become, in my mind, very problematic. A lot of the statements he has made about the trans community really concerns me. he posted something which I had no choice but to respond to as well on Elon Musk and how Elon is a great American who wants nothing but good things. And so here I am, and I'm like, Jesus, so I actually had to go and chronicle the awful things that Elon had done in just the previous months. He said this, and here's what he did, and here's this, and here's this, and here's this, just to correct the record. And that series of posts that I went super viral, millions and millions of people had shared it. And so it kind of grieved me. And I wonder if Richard at this point lives in kind of this semi-isolated space where he doesn't, he's tone deaf. I don't think he's a bad person.
Yeah.
But I've become grieved by many of the perspectives that he has, and I think he is doing some harm. And so I've struggled with that a little bit.
Yeah.
It is my hope, though, that I'm telling you, his books. He was one of the greatest science educators in the world,
Absolutely.
and so what will his legacy be? It is my hope that it is not that he sided with J.K. Rowling. In a world where trans people are arguably the most endangered and marginalized people, at least in the United States, I hope his legacy has been rescued a bit, and I hope he does his own rescuing there. I don't know. It's messy. So
Yeah. Russell Brand.
Russell is, he to me just has always struck me as a child. And now his embrace of Christianity to me, and this is subjective speculation, I think he's got some accusations against him that are pretty awful. I want to say, I forgot what the accusations were. I want to say they had to do with sex and something else.
The R word.
Yeah. And seems awfully convenient that he embraced Christianity in the wake of those accusations. I wonder if it's image rehabilitation.
Yeah.
But no, I don't consider him a serious Christian. No.
Yeah. And we'll end on this one because this is one of my favorite people, ironically, with being my journey, because it helped me a lot. Sam Harris helped me a lot too. Christopher Hitchens.
He's the one person that I wish I had had a chance to meet in person to say thank you.
Yeah.
When he died, I don't do like celebrity worship. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Worship's not the word, but if somebody passes away and you're like, oh, that's really sad, or I'll miss their work or whatever. But when Christopher Hitchens died, I wasn't that long out of the faith. And I grieved. We will never hear a new sentence in his voice again. We will never read another paragraph written by his hand again. We will never see another debate against an apologist again. And there was no one who articulated things in the way that he did, with the personality that he had, with the encyclopedic amount of knowledge that he had. There was no one even close in my mind. He was the standard. Mm-hmm. And I today, all the time, go back on YouTube and pull up old interviews and debates and speeches, and I just like hearing his voice. It comforts me. I learn stuff. Mm-hmm. And of the activists that we've lost, and we've lost Daniel Dennett and some others out there, Victor Stenger and others. It was the loss of Christopher Hitchens I feel the deepest grief over. And I would have, if I could have gone back in time and had the opportunity to walk up to him and shake his hand and say, you were there for me. You had no idea you were there for me. You didn't know my name. You didn't know I existed, but you were there for me and you helped me. That would be something that I would just really treasure forever. Yeah. And fortunately, thanks to the internet, et cetera, his voice does continue to be heard by people around the world. And for those who don't know the work and words of Christopher Hitchens, this must be remedied. You need to go and type it into a YouTube search engine, start clicking, and you will not be sorry.
Yeah, I have a retroactive grief for him. When did he pass? Was it 2008 or 2011?
2011.
2011.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I was full blown, Christian at the time, and found him, like you said, through the internet, through YouTube, and yeah, just fell in love with him. And there was something just so, I just resonate with what you said. I mean, there was something about him that I just really liked. And when I found out, because at first when I found him, I thought he was still around. And then when I found out that he wasn't,
Yeah.
it was a weird feeling of I was kind of overwhelmed with grief. I went out and bought all his books, and I was just so sad that this guy that had helped me so much in my journey, to then find out that he had died.
It was a perfect storm.
Yeah.
The tenor of his voice, his delivery, his strength, his humor, his compassion. I mean, it's funny when he was on stage, even with some pretty awful people like Dinesh D'Souza, he was always the adult in the room. Even when he was being a little playful,
Yeah.
he is the person that, when I say, he was kind to, I forget the name of the preacher. He was kind pretty much to almost everybody who was on stage with him, even people who had really awful ideas, but he wasn't weak. He
Yeah.
was strong. He was a steamroller. He
Yeah.
was, and I think that's what I want. I think we can be the adults in the room, and instead of going up and pointing at someone's face and saying, fuck you, blah, 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 we can
Yeah.
go on and we can be just as strong as we would have been otherwise. But we can also come off like, hey, we're credible and we're well informed and we're compassionate, and we're doing this because we care about people and we want to build a better world, and we want to defeat the bad ideas to make room for better ideas. And that was who Christopher Hitchens was for me. And he's sort of and in many ways, that's the style that I aspire to. So
Yeah, me too. His intellect was, in fact, I'm reading Hitch 22, and it's like I got to keep looking up words. I'm like, why
that's a
don't you look
thick
up
little
words?
book. That's a thick one.
Yeah, it is hard to
Yeah.
get through.
Yeah.
I love it, but it's the words are just,
Yeah.
he's using words that I've never heard before, and so it is a very dense book. And but man, yeah, I'm with you. He's someone that I will click. I'll literally just look up the best of Christopher Hitchens. And for me, I think it was his intelligence as well as his just his quick wit. And also, he struck me as a guy that he was okay in his own skin and just didn't give a rat's ass what you thought. He was still going to tell you what he thought. And that's a new thing for me, because, as a Christian, I don't know if Christianity has that people pleaser mechanism that kind of, you kind of become chameleon, all things to all people. And, if someone says this, you kind of get softer with it, where he was like,
Yeah.
I loved it.
He didn't care if you were comfortable. Yeah.
No,
Good stuff.
no. Well, man, we've done almost 2 hours, dude. I really do appreciate you. And I know we go way back, but it really did mean a lot to have you, platform me, and it helped really grow my channel. And now it's something I do, twice a week, and have been really involved in, and feel very called, if you will, to be the voice that the voice that I'm contributing to this whole discussion. I don't come from a scientific background, but I do come from the world of evangelical Christianity. And that is, in the words of one of my atheist science friends who was never in church ever in his life, he said, Timmy, it's like you got a superpower because you've lived that life and now you're not in that world. And he said, I grew up atheist all my life. So he goes, it just sounds so weird, the things that you used to believe, but you have that ability to tap back into your mind like you do. You have that superpower. And I think it's quite extraordinary to be on this journey. And I appreciate you, all the help and the encouragement that you've been to me over the last couple of years. I really appreciate it.
You're very kind. Oh, it's been fun to hang out. I hope that people walk away feeling encouraged and reminded that life's a journey, and the journey never ends. And let's make every day a discovery. And thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, man. I appreciate it. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much. Always, as I say, cuss and discuss down below, like, share, do all the stuff. And I do have a Facebook group called Timmy's Deconstruction Community. Make sure to join that. Thank you, Seth. Peace, everybody.